Enregistrement. Okay. Okay, let's start. Welcome to this European Forum Seminar, EU Migration Policy in Humanity in Law and in Practice versus Alternative, organized by the GUE NGL European Left. We will have the chance today to count with a series of speakers, very expert on EU policy on migration and especially expert on the impact of such policy in the field and in the ground. So we will have a first panel in which we will analyze what happened in the ground. We really see in the last months an increase number of human rights violations for migrant against migrant and refugee. In terms of pushback, in terms of increase of deaths, especially when we look at the Canary Islands, but not only. Externalization policy as really main pillar of EU policy, immigration and asylum, and again, criminalization of solidarity for who save life at sea. So we will see with three speakers this situation in the field and the ground, and then we will move through an analysis on the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. The European Commission proposal published the 23rd of September include a series of non-legislative and legislative files, very worrying. We have seen that if we imagine the implementation of such proposal in the field, clearly, there will be an increase of arbitrary detention, a lack of access to justice, and of course, a very, very problematic and strange concept of solidarity, where the sponsorship of return is considered as a kind of solidarity. But this will be the second panel. And of course, between the first and the second panel, we will have the chance to open a discussion and with the presence of some member of the European Parliament, and everyone wants to make questions. So I propose yeah, I will explain about the translation. I propose to make the first presentation and then to go forward the question, and then to open the second panel and then go to question. I'm just shortly explain how it works for translation. You will have the chance to have at least 5 languages: English, French, Spain, German, and Greek. You have a globe in the in your desk where it's right interpretation. Please enter and push the button down when you choose your language. So again, you have the choice between 5 languages. You go to the interpretation where there is a globe, and then you push down. It seems that for who use mobile device, it's write more and not interpretation. So if, and of course, in terms of question, you are pleased to write it in the chat, so we can collect all the question, and we will open the debate after the first panel. So I will not take more time because we have really the chance to have a high level panel of experts providing us a very clear overview on what happened in the field. We will start with the border, what is called the Balkanic routes from Turkey until Croatia, with Milena Zavovic, president of the Are You Serious organization and head of advocacy for Border Violence Monitoring Network. So Milena, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for invitation. Border Violence Monitoring Network is a coalition of 12 grassroots NGOs that have been closely monitoring realities in the field and how European policies often pervert in what is seen in the border areas especially. Our main focus is documenting cases of border violence and pushbacks. And in the preliminary findings for 2020, We have seen that the use of torture or inhumane or degrading treatment by officials at EU borders, including towards minors, remains stubbornly high. 85% of all testimonies from over 4,500 migrants that we have personally or our volunteers talked to along the borders at 11 different states complained of such treatment. And what is especially worrying is that over a third of this group included minors, the youngest of whom was just 5 months old. So this is clearly demonstrating the indiscriminate nature of these practices. A closer focus on testimonies from Croatia reveals abuse in nearly 90% of recorded cases in 2020, and increasingly documents multiple forms of choreographed abuse, including, for example, mock executions, also in presence of minors, often affecting their parents. This is also an increase of 10% from what we have recorded in 2019. And the general impression, especially along Croatian and Greek borders, which are the areas that we are focusing on mostly, is that the COVID measures and the lack of presence of independent border monitors in the region actually amplified violence. Some of the most prominent forms of torture that we have documented include dog bites, forced undressing with or without sexual assault, and forcing people to walk naked back from Croatia to Bosnia, for example. Use of firearms is also widespread along Croatian and Greek borders. And in Croatian case, as I mentioned, it includes mock executions, but also shots fired in the nearest proximity of people, which already led to deaths and serious injuries, including the incident from 2 years ago, which I found especially alarming because two 12-year-old children were shot in the face by Croatian border guards. No one was ever found accountable for these violations. This year alone, we have documented the use of firearms on up to 800 people, with 34% of all testimonies, including the presence of minors. Also, what is important to say, if we are focusing on the Croatian border, in the first 9 months of 2020, over 14,000 pushbacks have been recorded from Croatia to Bosnia alone. So we expect the numbers to reach or even surpass what we have recorded last year, which was between 20 and 25,000 individuals illegally expelled from European territories on this border alone. I'm happy to see that the European Ombudswoman's Office has today announced that they will open an inquiry into possible failure of the European Commission to ensure that Croatian authorities respect fundamental rights while conducting EU-funded border operations against migrants and refugees. We are hoping for similar action also in Greece, but also Romania and other countries that are perpetrating such violence. We are also quite closely focusing on the trends of chain pushbacks, especially those from Italy or Austria, using the readmission agreements, bilateral readmission agreements that are becoming like a first step in the chain refoulement procedure that explodes in violence once people reach Croatia, where they're not held as asylum seekers, but actually expelled in a very violent manner, often also with the destruction of their personal belongings and theft. Not to go into many details, because I'm sure that we will touch upon it later, I would also like to remind everyone that what we are talking about and the perpetrators of such crimes, which seem to be very choreographed and also very well coordinated, are actually funded by the European Union. Croatia alone is a beneficiary of over 108 million euro under European Asylum, Migration and International Fund, and has received additional 23.3 million euro in emergency assistance for migration and border management, while failing to establish the independent border monitoring mechanism, for example, that was supposed to be a way to safeguard human rights at our borders. Happy to go into the topic of the independent border monitoring a bit later, but I think it would be okay to also hear other speakers now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Milena. I think that you really give a very worrying overview on in terms of use of violence in all the Balkanic routes, and especially in specific country, and of course of pushback. That it's something that we are really seeing everywhere in the Mediterranean region, from Italy to Libya, from Greece to Turkey, in all the Balkanic routes, from Cyprus to Lebanon. That is something that we have really to underline and to denounce. Voy en castellano para introducir la próxima persona que va a hablar. Es Elena Maleno, de Caminando Frontera, una especialista de Frontera Sur. Desde muchísimos años, Elena, hemos visto en el lado de Frontera Sur, en el Mediterráneo Occidental, aumentar de salida de barcos desde Argelia hacia España. Conocemos muy bien la situación muy trágica que viven los argelinos en sus países, pero también una reapertura de la ruta de Canarias con consecuente trágico aumento de muertos en esa frontera. Elena, ¿nos puede contar lo que está pasando en Frontera Occidental? Muchas gracias.
Frontera Occidental and Western.
Yes, as you were saying, during the pandemic, there were two routes that have remained very active. One of them is the Algerian route, and unfortunately, rescue services are not alerted by the Algerian authorities. So many boats have disappeared, and many families, Algerian families, are looking for the missing persons. The problem with this route is that it's very difficult for families to access information and also to present a complaint about these disappearances and people that have gone missing, and do it in Spain. On the other hand, we also have the Atlantic route. It was inactive since 2006, but it is now opened again because of the closure of the Mediterranean route, because of the blockade and the militarization process in the north of Morocco. We have several countries working together here, and this is very difficult to follow. We have Mauritania, Morocco, and Senegal. So we have 180, 170 people, and they're coming from Senegal. So what's happening is that rescue operations are very difficult there because they have dismantled the public rescue service. For a long time, this was a matter of pride for the Spanish state, but with the so-called migratory crisis, this service has been dismantled and search and rescue has become more difficult. We have many boats and many victims on this Atlantic route. We think from the monitoring we're doing from our organization, we think that we might have lost over 900 people on the Atlantic route. We will draw conclusions by the end of the year, and many boats go missing. 90% of the bodies are never retrieved. So this is a dramatic situation for the families. Apart from that, the families cannot present a complaint. We've seen that in the Canary Islands, when a family comes to present a complaint at the police station, the police itself blocks that family and they hinder the identification of the bodies and the search for the missing persons. So in the Canary Islands, we also see that the islands are blocked. We've seen this in Lesbos and in Chios and elsewhere. So they block people who are in the islands, according to the European Union, so that they do not have this calling effect. So what's happening in the Canary Islands is that there are human rights violations within the islands. The conditions in which they arrive, they're very bad, and there's institutionalized racism, and migrant people have already demanded this, and women are separated from their children for months awaiting an DNA test. This has been happening for months, and now the mothers have been fighting hard, and these regulations have been eliminated. We have seen that the conditions, the receiving conditions, the host conditions have increased racism and xenophobia within Spain as a whole. So we are alert to see this increase in racism and aggression and hate crimes. Therefore, we need to emphasize that this route has been very active in the last months of the pandemic, because many people who are reaching the shores coming from Senegal and Morocco are people who are fleeing the crisis that COVID-19 has caused in their countries. For example, in tourism, people who used to work there, young people who used to work there are jobless, and they have started fleeing their countries. And they have fled very fast in the past months. That's why the measures that are being taken is that Frontex is going to come to the Canary Islands. Let us remember that Frontex is not transparent at all. This is an agency that has been part in the criminalization process against human rights defenders. Myself, in particular, I've been a victim of that. So we really need to know what activities Frontex is going to be undertaking in the Canary Islands, and whether they will not cause more death and destruction, and whether they will not criminalize people and human rights defenders further in this situation. So this is something we can discuss with the MEPs to see how we can run our checks and surveil this very obscure and dark agency. Thank you for your
Thank you very much,
invitation.
Elena. You touch a very key point, the question of accountability of the EU agency Frontex. I think that we can discuss later with the MEPs. I remind to everyone that can just put question in the chat. So I will collect all the question, and after MEP's intervention, we can make all the question to the speakers. Elena was mentioning the words of criminalization, that it's something that's really the reality against search and rescue organization. So we have now the pleasure to discuss this specific topic with Íñigo Mijangos, President of Salvamento Marítimo Humanitario Aita Mare. Íñigo, la palabra es tuya.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
Muchas gracias por la invitación. Algunos de vosotros sabréis que el barco de salvamento Aita Mare es conocido por las diferentes
and energy to overcome all the difficulties that European and national institutions devise to prevent the normal development of rescue work at sea. This work, on the other hand, must be carried out by the institutions themselves. Nevertheless, despite this, we have sailed 7,000 miles on the humanitarian and rescue mission, and we have rescued more than 400 people in 2 years. Very few for the effort that our project has involved so far. But despite this, we will not give up, rest assured. The NGOs that makes up the civilian rescue fleet are not private entities that have been set up for the sole purpose to rescue people at sea as we are treated by the Commission. These NGOs have clear message to the Commission, to the European Commission: lead and coordinate institutional humanitarian operation to end the tragedy of the death of thousands of people every year at Europe's external borders. In the recommendation within the new Pact of Migration, the Commission seems to understand that NGOs are private entities, something like private company, devoid to any other intention than annoying whim of intervening in migration issues, and that they should be regulated for grant safety of navigation and to guarantee security standards and migration management. The entities that makes up the movement of the civilian rescue fleet do not wish to be there. We are private entities, yes, but we are the response of a society that does not accept the treatment that EU and its member states are giving to people on the move. We are a voice of society, as well as the hundreds of NGOs working in hotspots, roads, hotels, cities, squads, canteens, beaches all over Europe. We are a heterogeneous current where you can find people from all over the political spectrum. left and right, including different religious groups, but we are all have in common the humanist thinking. We are a public cry that must be heard for decency and for the survival of the EU. If the fundamental values of human rights are not seen as something that cannot be renounced, the EU is only economical agreements. Dress it as you like. But there is no political will to listen to us, and that sums almost everything. There is no political will to facilitate the entry into Schengen territory to anyone who does not comply with certain cultural, political, economical, and why not to say, also racial and religious characteristics. This means that Europe is living with an identity disorder. Its institutions maintain a policy and a practice that is refractory to welcome people and must use a double language to make it presentable to the public and to any moderate informer observer. In other words, they wish to do something that goes against the very essential rules of Western democracies. As a result of this, after Ursula von der Leyen's statement, saving lives at sea is not an option, the civilian rescue fleet now has 7 ships in port held for various administrative or judicial reasons and only 1 operational. The recommendation of the European Commission to the SAR operation published in September of this year are a declaration of willingness of establish a European framework to control to NGOs. Written full, the event seems positive, but there are written pharisaic language ensuring that everything is done for the safety of the people rescued, the crews, and the scrupulous respect to international law. But nowhere can be read that EU is going to lead an institutional rescue program in the Mediterranean or now in the Atlantic that will be much simpler and in line with the principles that are supposed to govern Europe. As we can see, is an undistinguished desire to keep the rescue ship under control. Migration policy in Europe, based on realpolitik to give pleasure to positions that are incompatible with each other, leads to an unsatisfactory result for everyone, and in the end, we have an wandering, incomplete, and incoherent policy. At sea, this translates into a renunciation of rescue, which in humanitarian terms is genocide. A normal canoe or rubber dinghy can carry about 100 of people on board. There are always minor children and women. If there are no assisted on their journey and there are no incidents, it is usually 3 or 4 days sailing in the Mediterranean, up to 6 or 8 days in the Atlantic on the reopened Cayuco Road. Many get lost at sea without a trace and do not count in the official number of victims. The real extent of the victims of European migration policy is a secret that keeps on the bottom of the sea, and we will never know. However, the official death toll is... Yeah. Oh. However, the official death toll is staggering, rising to 20,000 by 2014. And what is beyond of the reach of the European public, and it's also missing on the September 2020 Immigration Pact, is that collaboration with third countries such as Libya for interception and return in international waters to a country in war is also causes death and suffering, in addition to be contrary to the 1951 Refugee Status Convention. Many survivors report being returned up for 4 times to Libya detention center, where torture, slavery, and rape of women are common practice. 10,000 people in the last year. The Legal Citizens Initiative, born out of the rejection of institutional actions, is uncomfortable, as well as the actions turned into private entities. Some states, agencies, or European leaders trying to blur them by accusing them of being illegal, but they are not. The only sin is to be contrary to the desire of the executive power. We would have applauded if the Migration Pact should be directed at establishing safe and legal ways of entering Europe and not controlling private entities. without renouncing with the inherent right to control borders, there should be humanitarian public deployment to assist victims of trafficking. Collaboration with third countries to do the dirty job at the borders is a total renunciation of human rights and is deliberately omitted from the pact. What for the NGOs is a matter of substance, the obligation of comply with safety standards in navigation and compatibility with migration management processes, for countries like Libya, Morocco, or Turkey, with which there are agreements worth millions, are matters of this order. This collaboration is an abomination and should be ended immediately to make it conditional or make it conditional to strict compliance with the human rights in these countries. Thousands of people suffer every day from torture and violations paid with our taxes. Instead, programs of real development in origin or reducing European economical interventionism in Africa, in African countries, and for fair and balanced trade and economical exchange should be managed. It is not a coincidence that the legislative initiatives on the new migration pact are those that establish new restrictive measures and suspension of rights on displaced persons, migrants and refugees. And there are recommendations and guidelines leaving into the member countries decide how to humanitarian organizations and rescue assist should be treated. The political intention is clear. I had expected stronger commitment to human rights for this commission, but in the first steps applaud Greece for its efforts to be the shield of Europe by shooting civilians fleeing from war. I already saw with horror what will we have to expect. The pressure of people on the move cannot be responded to with a policy of higher and immoral policy. The motivation of people on the move, migrants or refugees, are much stronger and they will always find a way. The answer must be to establish safe ways to educate, to raise awareness, to resolve inequalities, and to work for peace where it's a conflict. And we cannot ignore the fact that the history of human is a history of migration, and society must be prepared to welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inigo. Maybe just two technical questions. First of all, if you have any problem with sound and interpretation, you will see in the chat some information on how let's work it. Secondly, I will now open the debate, giving the floor to two MEPs present to react to what have been mentioned in by the three first speakers. But if any question, please put in the chat so I can then. So I think that we have seen with the three speakers a very dramatic picture in terms of violence, pushback, externalization. The new pact will only make more worrying the situation. And again, these new migratory routes that it's referred to, the old one in 2006 of Canary Island, the Algeria. So we have really a dramatic picture. I will ask to Fernando Barrera, MEPs from Bildu, to react to this first intervention. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks to all, namely to the panelists. As some of you will surely know, some GUE NGL MEPs visited Lesbos last September and had the opportunity to meet on the ground a complex reality that shocked us all and made us even more aware of the need to confront the Pact on Asylum and Migration that condemns migrants to be packed in such a black holes in the external borders of the EU. I will just say that once again, it's the NGOs, dedicated journalists, and all kinds of volunteers on the ground that make migrants able to survive when they get into the hot spots and the tough reality waiting for them there. So first of all, let's express our commitment to the denounce of the criminalization of these supports to refugees and migrators. And on the other hand, deeply thank all those involved for their job. Well, you know that the new pact on asylum and migration will have to be discussed and processed in the European Parliament. And the left group of the Parliament will defend that any European policy on this matter should be based on the right to migrate as a human right, and the respect of human rights, one of the main pillars of the European project, as they say. The lacks of this new pact delivered by the European Commission have been clearly shown by the panelists that took the floor before me. But I just want to say that bringing to an end the Dublin system is crucial in order to start making things properly and human rights accountable. We need safe paths to the member states chosen by those arriving to the European Union, and the mandatory relocation scheme all around the Union. These points mentioned are just the basics, and as I said before, we will confront the new pact initiative according to these principles. Thanks again for your presence here,
Fernando,
and particularly for the job you do on the ground. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Fernando, to react on what have been presented by other panelists. I will give now the floor to Kostas Arvanitis from Syriza, always MEP in the GUE NGL. Kostas, can you hear me?
Πολύ καλά.
Thank you.
Ωραία. Κλείνω τον ήχο το δικό μου για να μην έχει ανάδραση. Σας χαιρετίζω όλους. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you, and I would like, first of all, to thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to underline two issues. As Fernando just said, together with 8 or 9 other members of parliament, we had the possibility to go to Lesbos. But I would like to underline a very important point. When the European Union is addressing the way of life, I think that this is purely a right-wing policy. It is extremely paramount to address the way the EU is going to deal with migration. We know that there are contradictions between member states, so they want to promote this European way of life. We heard Ursula von der Leyen on this issue. I think that they have really transformed those migrants who suffer. They are now considered to be the enemies of Greece. They are considered to be the enemies of the European Union. They now face a kind of a European shield. We also heard the president of Turkey, Erdogan, who has a totally unacceptable behavior. So this is about hypocrisy in the EU. I think that migration is actually a tool that is used by many people. And unfortunately, the victims are migrants, but also local populations who suffer so much. I think that the EU is going to build concentration camps. You know, this is really what the architecture is all about. Of course, Ursula von der Leyen or Mr. Skinner, the competent commissioner, they're not happy when we say that. But what we have been able to see with our comrades is a tragic situation. Tents on sand, a limited access to water resources, a very dangerous setting. We know that we also have there very strong winds, very dire meteorological conditions. So it's unacceptable to see that we make their life so difficult. So people there live in these camps in horrendous conditions. The living conditions there are really terrible. The asylum procedures are blocked. So this is really corresponding to the right-wing policies. So I really would like to share that there is a very important geopolitical game here. Germany plays a role, so does France, Russia, and the United States as well. We see all those situations with the pushback of migrants. I hope that I can have a few more minutes to describe this situation. I am sure that you know this situation. We have volunteer people there, activists. They know this situation very well. But I think that we need really to highlight that this is really an unacceptable policy. First of all, the data regarding the number of migrants. The data is not accurate. You know, this is not going to change the European way of life, not at all. We need to integrate these persons in our economic life. You know that we hear a lot about Islamophobia. Also, this is a real problem. There is this false notion that migrants are at the origin of terrorism. This is, of course, the right-wing speech that we hear. And we also see that the moderate right-wing politicians agree with this policy. I now would like to conclude this short intervention. And I would like to say that this migration issue cannot be solved if we do not include the humanitarian dimension. We are a political strength, and we really need to focus on this. The poor are actually threatened by these policies that are actually impoverishing people. These people are forced to leave their country. They are obliged to leave their country. In the European Union, the Afghan is not considered is considered to be a migrant, not as a refugee. So they are always considered to be migrants. They are not considered to be refugees. So they are considered to be illegal migrants. So, you know, if this is the European way of life, we disagree with that. So we really need to speak up. We really need to share this with the European citizens. We share the fear of the unknown, the fear of the pandemic, the fear of unemployment, and now we have a fourth one, the fear of the foreigners. So this is extremely disturbing, and I'm sure that the left has a role to play there. We have to explain things to European citizens. We have to explain the reality. I also would like to say that the architecture, this political architecture built by the right in Europe,
because
is actually symbolized by a camp. Yes, I am almost finished. Thank you. So, if possible, I know that we have talked about this with Bernardo. We should go to Clivy, that is the new camp. It has the same structure as the Karatepe camp. It is exactly the same structure. Thank you very much for your attention. So I wish you a lot of success.
Thank you very much, Kostas, and sorry to have
Merci,
to cut
merci
you.
infiniment. Je suis vraiment désolée d'avoir dû vous interrompre.
Sorry, I have my interpretation on. So I propose to use the last 15 minutes for a question to each panelist, also reacting to the very deep analysis made by the two MEPs, and thank you again to Constance and Fernando to provide their analysis. So maybe I will start with Milena. I also inform you that Milena shared in the chat their policy analysis on the pact with a kind of simulation also, no, and on the pact in what will happen if the pact will be implemented in Russia. Very, very interesting. So I inform you that you can find it in the chat. Milena, Inigo and Elena underline the fact that criminalization against migrants, against people who make search and rescue at sea, but also who make solidarity in all the migratory journey is still there. Which is the situation related to this topic in the Balkanic routes?
Unfortunately, countries in the Balkan route are not much different than the countries that are hindering the work of search and rescue organizations. Their methods might be a bit different, but the underlying idea is the same. Instead of addressing the questions that are raised by NGOs, it seems to them to be much easier to silence the NGOs that are asking the questions. So for the past several years in Croatia, we have been facing a very public defamation campaign against human rights defenders, specifically targeting those who are monitoring violations at our borders and try to ensure fair access to asylum on Croatian territory. Unfortunately, the NGO that I lead was one of the groups that was most severely attacked, so to speak. The pressure peaked when one of our volunteers was charged for assisting illegal border crossing. And what he actually did as a member of our NGO was the only thing that he was legally obliged to do. He approached police officers in the field that informed them of the presence of an undocumented family that wanted to ask asylum. And in a politically very charged trial, the Ministry of Interior asked for his imprisonment, 43,000 euro fine, and the ban of work of our NGO. And despite overwhelming amounts of evidence provided and proving that our volunteer didn't do anything illegal, he was found guilty based on unaware negligence. We have appealed to the verdict and the case is still ongoing. But this example led to a situation where no human rights defender dares to assist potential asylum seekers in exercising their legal rights without fearing of ending up convicted for the crimes he or she didn't commit. And we know that we are doing everything according to law, but that there's no guarantee of fair treatment to any of us. Croatian courts are unfortunately still far from being independent, like the courts in other parts of our region, and especially in cases like this where the political stakes are very high. So at the moment, instead of having a functional asylum system and NGOs supporting the asylum seeking process, we have a state-imposed hunt for people who are passing through our country like ghosts, far from inhabited areas, afraid of police, afraid of any sort of human contact. And on the other hand, you have terrified local people who know that they might be persecuted if they offer them a glass of water, let alone help them in approaching armed police officers to exercise their legal rights. And as there is complete impunity regarding border violence, there seems to be impunity in the cases of badgering human rights defenders in the region. I'd like to briefly bring to your attention the currently unfolding situation of our employee and her partner, who is an asylum seeker from Iraq, so asylum grantee, I apologize. And it is important to say that the employee dedicated the past 6 years of her life to independent investigations of human rights violations perpetrated by the Ministry of Interior and Croatian Security and Intelligence Agency. And we believe this was the reason her partner was recently approached by agents of Security and Intelligence Agency who tried to convince him to start collaborating with them. And after he politely refused to participate in their work, his asylum was revoked with no prior warning or no due procedure, using questionable evidence, and he was ordered to leave Europe within 30 days. We are talking about a person who has spent years living in this country and was very well integrated already. and where his asylum was used as a bargaining chip in pressuring him to collaborate with the state with what we only can assume was the attempt to additionally try to incriminate human rights defenders. We have also, of course, appealed to this decision, and we see this appalling act as a very clear message to our staff members to steer clear of any investigation in government wrongdoings. And we are especially worried as the pressure is now expanded to the most vulnerable members of our families. And these sort of pressures have also extended to our partners in Greece and Turkey, who are monitoring pushbacks over the Euros border, and even pushbacks from detention centers, such as Paranesti pre-removal center, which became a main torture site in mainland Greece, which is something that we have also been extensively reporting about. Our partners in Greece, who are now under the scope of this larger investigation against NGOs in Greece, are also monitoring increased involvement of Frontex in pushbacks to and from Greece. And this is another arena where we see the lack of true monitoring mechanisms, as their re-elected interim fundamental rights officer, who used to be the part of the executive director's former cabinet, is, I would say, questionably independent. This is also one of the topics that they need to be a part of this conversation. On the one hand, the role of the NGOs and independent monitors, and on the other hand, the failure of institutions to establish really independent monitoring mechanisms that would lead to accountability of those in charge of human rights violations at the borders, which have now become a main tool of a European response instead of welcoming people who are seeking safety in our countries.
Thank you very much, Milena. There is a question I will ask to Elena or Inigo. Sorry, if you can mute your microphone if you don't speak. Thanks. So there are a question. The person agree on the fact that it's very important to communicate around the reality of migration, but what about to explain better also the opportunity of legal pathway and safe pathway to Europe for migration? That is one question. I don't know if Elena or Inigo want to reply, and maybe I will add another question to both of you. Costas mentioned the fact of detention. We see also that in the new pact of asylum and migration, if we take into account the pre-screening procedure and the border procedure, we will lead really to a long terms of arbitrary detention, and then also all the question of return policy, that it's a kind of pillar of the new pact on migration and asylum. Also coming back to the situation in Canary Island, I see that new flights start to deporting back people to Mauritania. So I asked to Elena and Inigo if they want to comment both for the question of legal pathway and the way to communicate on it, and this question to the increase of detention. I know that also in Canary Island, new detention have been open, and the question of return that still is a kind of obsession at EU level. Thank you. So I will, and just maybe a comment that I've seen that many people put report and information in the chat. So please have a look, and I will pass the floor to Elena and to Inigo later.
Sí, efectivamente, hoy hay un vuelo de deportación a Mauritania de nacionales de terceros países. Creemos que serán las personas que están en el centro de internamiento de extranjeros. Son solo 23, pero creemos que España quiere lanzar un mensaje a la gente que está llegando, y son senegaleses, un mauritano y otro compañero de Guinea-Conakry.
These are people from Mauritania and Guinea-Conakry. That's why we have blocked the Canary Islands, and they want to create a new Lesbos there because they're bargaining with Mauritania and Morocco to return people from, they are discussing with Mauritania to return all Africans that come in from Mauritania. but this is not even checked. And we are concerned about the detention conditions because what we see is that there's a lack of human rights perspective. It is clear that we discuss policies a lot, but we do not have human rights at the center, at the core. When the colleague was discussing the solutions, I think that the solutions are clear. We have to review the system and how other communities access rights. There's institutionalized racism, and it works in two ways. First, through criminalization, but then also with compassion policies. And here, social organizations have to look back at what they're doing, whether we are providing access to human rights or whether we're just thinking in terms of charity, because charity and these policies are also the way to clean and to have a good image towards the outside and put the responsibility on somebody else. The European Union does not have to become a white savior. They just have to respect the human rights of everybody who is in their territory or moving towards it. And this approach of human rights approach is where we need to find the response to many of the situations that are happening right now. The problem is that we have normalized, and especially citizens have normalized, that systematic violations of human rights of some communities is okay. And many times, so-called left-wing parties hide behind racism and xenophobia and far-right discourses to continue with the same policies. And I'd like to really ask that we survey what Frontex is doing, that we really analyze what they're doing. I was myself criminalized, and the Spanish police was asking for life imprisonment for myself because I called the rescue services. And in the dossier, in the criminalization dossier, there were Frontex reports, and Frontex went around asking migrants about the activities of social organizations and from other migrant colleagues. That's what they did. I could read the interrogations that Frontex conducted about me with migrant people. So what we need is a human rights approach and a transparency approach in the different agencies in place. That's why the pact has to be checked. It has to be reviewed because we fear that when people die, this is not just death. This has to do with responsibility. Why do we hide the victims? Because we hide the perpetrators in that way. And the perpetrators are within European policies and in Europe's institutional racism. So we do not want to perpetuate the charity and compassion policies. Migrant colleagues and friends are saying this. They're losing their right to life, struggling to access human rights in the so-called Europe of human rights that we have been sold in the past. That's why we really need to see it in this way right now and see how we can change those policies, transform those policies from a human rights perspective and not from a patronizing perspective.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this very powerful intervention. I think that you go right at the point. Just to shortly also answer to the question made in the chat related to the legal pathway. I think that if you look at the 600 page of the pact, the part related to the legal pathway is quite absent. There is only non-legislative file mentioning the need to increase legal pathway, but concretely nothing. And if you look at the legislative file, it's all related to increased return, increased detention, pre-screening, and of course to follow the line of the Dublin regulation. So really we have to speak about legal pathway, but they are totally absent also in the European Pact, and that it's important to underline. So we have like 2-3 minutes left. I will pass the floor to Inigo if you want to make additional comments also relating on Matt's intervention. Thank you very much, Inigo. I don't know if you are there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yes, I totally agree with what Elena says. And also, I think it was one of my points that we must point into be very strong on the position of human rights in Europe. And of course, the solution is it's pathways, legal pathways for the people to come in Europe. What we see in our medical team in HIOS, and also just reviewing the text of the new Migration Pact, what it's fixing on the facts that and the steps that Europe it's doing, it's what is working, let's say, in the experience as system to send the people back, or just telling them and advise what is going to happen to them. That this is what we see clearly in the Aegean Islands. This is what they are fixing in the next situation. I mean, we see Lesbos, the situation of the people on the camp, that this is to give a clear advice to the people. If you come into Europe, this is what you are going to find. There is no option to go into Europe. There is no way to leave these camps because most of the people are rejected. They are going to make exactly the same system in the Canarian Islands. What they see, the last strategy from Italy, just stopping the rescue ship as with administrative issues, just trying to fix this system for the rescue vessels, asking and requesting many things related to the security. This is what they are taking into the new Migration Pact. So they are talking about controlling the rescue vessels. So everything that they have the experience that is working to stop, let's say, a human rights vision of the people on the move, this is what they are implementing in the legal and into the structure of the response of Europe to these people. So I think we are just following in Europe the opposite way that we must follow. So again, I think it's important to focus and to stick on the human rights perspective, and this is something that we cannot renounce. So of course that could have some strong changes in Europe, and this is what we must work in education and explaining the people what is the real consequence of migration and what will be the impact in our societies, and assume that this is a reality that we cannot escape.
Okay, thank you very much, Inigo, for your comments. I will use Muriel's question to pass to the second panel. So you clearly say, okay, thanks for the analysis, but what we can do concretely. And so the second panel wants to enter more into detail on the impact of the pact, even if in the first one we have mentioned quite a lot this new proposal, but also to look at alternatives. So I think that can be really be an answer to what we can concretely do faced to this very complicated situation. So I will start with the second panel. I want to really thank you very much, Inigo, Milena, and Elena, for a very, very interesting intervention, and of course to Costas and Fernando for their comment. So moving to the second panel, I will give the floor to David Conlan-Smith, Senior Counsel to the European Lawyer in Lesbos. So please, can you provide us some information on what happened in the island? We have all seen the tragic imaging coming from Moria before, and then from the new camp. And yes, which possible alternatives such face to this very, very worrying picture that we have from the situation in the Greek island in the field.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, and greetings from Dublin. At the outset, I would like to thank Malin Björk, MEP, for the very kind invitation to make a presentation this morning. I'm asked to participate on behalf of the Council of Bars and Law Societies of Europe, which is the representative body for lawyers from 45 European countries. Our experience in this regard relates to a project that we have been operating in Lesbos and now in Samos since this summer, together with the German Bar Association, the DAV, called European Lawyers in Lesbos. And this is a voluntary project staffed by over 200 expert asylum lawyers from, I think, 18 European countries who have traveled to Lesbos to provide their services voluntarily with the project since it was established in 2016. We have assisted over 11,000 migrants on the ground in Lesbos, and you'll find information about us at our website. I'm just doing a little advertising for us, if that's all right, for a moment, at www.elil.eu. And if anyone would like to donate, they are more than welcome. Lawyers are an essential part of the right of effective access to justice. And that obviously underpins the common European asylum system and will have to continue to underpin it in the future. Last year, we provided legal assistance to between 20 to 25% of all asylum seekers in Lesbos. And we know this makes a concrete difference because 75% of persons who are assisted by our project are granted asylum. And that compares with an average of only 47% in Greece. Now, for pressures of time, I'm going to concentrate on the pre-entry screening regulation proposal, which is, I think, intended to avoid a future Moria. But if I have a chance in a few minutes or a little later this morning, I'd like to say a few words on the solidarity mechanism in the proposed asylum and migration management regulation, because we have very significant concerns as to its impact on access to justice, access to a lawyer, and access to an effective remedy. The pre-screening regulation proposal appears, in fact, we think, to have been operated in Greece on the ground in the islands over the last couple of months. And by that I mean the system that has been introduced since the beginning of the year in Greece has transformed itself to provide for what you might call short notice interviews. So you have a registration interview and you're told about that maybe 1 or 2 days in advance. Then thereafter you will have your asylum interview, but you're only notified now of your asylum interview perhaps a day or 2 days in advance. And that can happen very quickly after the initial registration interview. And curiously, the asylum interview, for some reason not explained to our project, has been shortened to about 1 to 1.5 hours. And in the past, and when I say the past, I mean a few months ago, was about 3, 4, 5 hours, depending on the complexity of the claim. And we believe that the islands are being used effectively as what you might call a triage process to see whether or not the pre-screening regulation will work. The real difficulty we're finding in terms of consequences from this operation is that the information that is obtained during the initial registration interview is being used in the asylum interview and being used against applicants for asylum. Persons who have not had an opportunity to engage or instruct a lawyer, to take advice from a lawyer, and persons who are not given sufficient time to prepare for an asylum interview. So we believe that there is some form of triage process in operation. Turning to the text of the pre-entry screening regulation, I'm just going to mention a number of concerns we have. First of all, the assessment of vulnerability during the screening process. It's very unclear based on the text as to how this will operate in practice, how lawyers will have an opportunity to take instructions from their client, present their client's position and argue for a person being deemed to be vulnerable. Secondly, we say that, and very worryingly, the proposal cements in law a totally artificial legal concept of pre-entry. Now, either a person is in the European Union or they're not. If you arrive at the frontiers of the European Union with a view to applying for international protection, you are in the European Union and you should be allowed to automatically apply and immediately apply for international protection. And we say that that is at the heart of a very recent decision of the Court of Justice delivered on the 25th of June of this year, case 3620 VL against Ministerio Fiscal. And that's a case that you might consider when, I suppose, engaging with the terms of the pre-screening regulation. Secondly, we say that the proposal in this regard introduces entirely artificial time limits for the screening process. The time limit will be 5 days. There is no empirical or scientific or legal basis identified for this time limit, which, when you are talking about the hotspots in the Mediterranean and where they are dealing with large numbers of arrivals, is totally artificial. Our experience in Lesbos is that where you have large numbers of arrivals, the time limits are completely abandoned, and it leads to mass confinement of arriving migrants on the islands. Can I give you an example of that? The new Greek asylum law, which was introduced in January 2020, provides for a time limit at registration stage of 7 days only. And that's 2 days longer than the pre-screening proposal. And the 7-day limit could only be achieved at the beginning by the Greek authorities by actually suspending the registration process for everyone who had arrived in 2019 and who had not yet been registered. So what actually happened on January the 1st was, it was treated as a tabula rasa. There were no applicants. But if you arrived on January the 2nd, you were registered immediately, and therefore the 7-day time limit was complied with. But it was only achieved by freezing all of the applicants who had arrived in 2019. And of course, after numbers started to increase in January and February, the 7-day time limit could not be complied with. So the difficulty with the time limit contained in the pre-screening regulation proposal is that if you have very few arrivals, there will be a clear breach of rights because people are being rushed through the system without an opportunity to properly instruct a lawyer. And if you have too many arrivals, you will have congestion, as we've had in Moria and in Samos over the last few years, which leads to obvious issues in relation to detention, unnecessary detention, unlawful detention, and just general congestion and delays. That, of course, means that either way, it's inoperable and will probably be unlawful. The next concern I want to briefly mention relates to the monitoring of fundamental rights. Article 7 of the proposal says that member states are required to establish an independent monitoring mechanism to ensure compliance with European Union law. Now, in principle, that sounds welcome, but in fact, the text is vague, it's general, and it doesn't establish a clear relationship between national law and European Union law. It doesn't say how the mechanism will work, who will be the independent monitors, and how individual migrants can get access to these individuals. There is a reference in the proposal to the EU Fundamental Rights Agency issuing general guidance to the member states as to how the mechanism should operate. But we would recommend very clear fleshing out of this provision during the legislative process as between the Parliament and the Council. And it will need clear provisions in relation to monitoring with a right of access to for individuals. The last concern I want to mention, and obviously I could talk for 2 days in relation to the new pact, but the last concern I want to mention is it relates to the duty to provide information under the pre-screening regulation contained in Article 8. And when I say the duty to provide information, I'm not talking about the migrants, the arrivals, I'm talking about the member states. And the difficulty we have here is that the member states are not subject to a clear duty to provide information as to how to apply for international protection to all arrivals. The only persons they are obliged to provide information to are people who've already applied for international protection, so they know what to do, or where there are, and I'm quoting here, indications that they wish to apply. So it is being left to national caseworkers when they meet arrivals to say to themselves, have I an indication that these people might wish to apply for international protection? And that clearly is designed to limit the amount of applicants for international protection. It leaves too much discretion to individual caseworkers to decide what is an indication. And there is no good reason as to why information should not be provided to all arrivals. There are multiple other deficiencies in the new pact. I'm going to mention the safe country and detention provisions in the amended proposal for the Asylum Procedures Regulation. We have real concerns there, and I can discuss those later if I get an opportunity. But let me just say again how pleased we are to have received this invitation to speak to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to listen your analysis on one of the most worrying file in the pact, so the pre-screening. I will just add, taking the perspective, for example, of a country as Italy, where most of the people landing in the Italian territory are suffering, are victim of torture, which possible vulnerability assessment can be done in 5 days. So I think that there are really several questions on this pre-screening, as you have been very well mentioned. So I will pass the floor to Bernard Rook, coordinator of Seabrook Mainz. Again, there will be the same structure of the previous panel. So please, if you have any question, put in the chat. And then we will have these 3 panelists speech, and then MEPs will react, and then we will open the floor to the debate. So Bern, the floor is yours. Bern, are you there? Otherwise, we can pass to the other panelists and come back to Bern later. So maybe if Anila Noor from Global Refugee Led Network and founder of the New Women Connectors are, she's here.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, great. So I will leave the floor and then try to be back to Bernard later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for inviting me. I will start. I am one of those migrant and refugee we are talking about here. So I will start. Let's put a face of human on the migration. So we are all refugees who are coming to Europe. We are human. We are women, we are men, we are children. So this is what we are trying to do in our Global Refugee-Led Network and our initiative New Women Connector, because in our involvement in our journey, when we become and claim asylum, we find everyone is talking about refugees, everyone talking about migrants, but not talking with them. So there is a huge gap, and that's what we are trying to do at our network, our engagement. We are trying to be engaged in these debates. We are trying to understand how this policy talk. I will share recently in the start, everyone asking for the interpretation, for the translation, because we want to understand to each other, because we are saying similar thing, but in different languages. So this is actually happening. In our experience, we think we as a refugee and migrant who are coming, we have our own problems, we have our solutions, but policy, they are speaking their own languages, and refugee communities representative, they are speaking their own languages, and maybe they are all are speaking in the same languages, in the same things, but they're saying their ways are different. So that's what we are trying to do. We are creating a different kind of platform where we invite migrant, refugees, stateless, policymakers, so have an interaction with each other, because we believe integration, it should be like a muscle. It should work as a two ways, and it should grow within. So it shouldn't be responsibility of one partner. It should be a work in collaboration and solidarity. And I was so happy in the start when I was listening to first panel. I felt there are so many already with their they are expressing about the problem of border of Moria region. And I will more talk about the integration, who as a refugee and migrant who come in the countries, in the host countries of Europe, they face so many challenges. I will give a recent example. I will put also the link to our consultation work which we have done. What we done, we invite refugee and migrants to come in different languages and share about the consultation which is launched by European Commission, and to show their interest, what they think, what is not working, why it's not working. And what we did, we unpacked the question which European Commission put, even if we say consultation. So consultation is such a heavy word and heavy term. A refugee and migrant representative, a refugee migrant community think this is maybe for some experts, but consultation just means let's talk about our problems, let's talk about how we can create a future together. So that's what we did. We really translated, unpack the question, and we make it an easy way. We make it in Arabic, we make it in different languages, and ask communities what they think about this consultation, and we help them to be engaged in these debates, because there's a huge gap, not only about integration, but also huge gap of gender response in all this debate, because even in the migration agenda of 2015, and then EU Pact and recent EU Pact which they launched, there is a huge gap. There's no one talking about refugee women, no one's talking about migrant women. Everyone is talking about borders, how to keep these people who are coming, to stop them. So this is what we are trying to say, like, we are people who are coming, they are human, they are coming with their own potential, and how we can generate and take them as a human capital. So there is actually perspective we really want to change, like refugee and migrant who are coming, they are not a passive policy receiver. They can be a change maker, they can be a tool for the future of Europe. And that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to build understanding for the policymaker and for the communities, and we are trying to generate resources, tools, and how we can work together. And this is also my open invitation and request for everyone. So please try to work with us as a refugee and migrant representative with the communities. We really want to work together to understand the policy. When we say there's a European way of living, we really want to understand how we can make more visible. We need to more have interaction with each other to understand how we can combine and promote the European way. Because the expectation when you come as a refugee, I don't know how many you have experience even to go to camp. I live right now living in Netherlands, and when Corona happened, we came across so many our community volunteers who just text us, and they said, okay, there's a camp are being blocked, there's no human who can tell us where to go. And when Corona happened, everyone is talking about border closure, they make a social distance, but we as a refugee, we need more information. We need to know what to do. And even recent observation, which we are saying, is like digitalization. Everything is talking about technology. They are thinking about to put the borders in the technology, digitalization. They are talking about even this. The talk we are talking is more like becoming like a digital world, and this is giving more gap, more distance to the refugee and migrant communities. So that's what we are trying to do. We really want to make a systematic, meaningful participation of refugee and migrant in the debate. And I really invite all of you to work with us as a partner, and we really want to give live update from the representative of refugee and migrant who really want to work together with the policymaker, with the MAPs, with the politicians, with the European Commission, and they have capacity. But the thing is that there is hardly any platform, there is hardly any channel to be involved in this discussion. And what we are trying to do, we are trying to understand what are the policy and how we can involve in this discussion. So thank you so much. And if you have any question, I'd love to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anila, because you mentioned also what is missing in this pact, no? All the integration and who is missed in this discussion, migrant and refugee, and that is very, very important to be underlined. If Bernard Druck is there, the coordinator of Seabrook Mainz, I will pass him the floor to complete this picture around the pact and possible alternative before give the floor to MEPs. So Bern, are you there? It seems not. So what I propose, we in this panel, we have seen really an analysis on one of the most worrying piece legislative file on the pact, on the pre-screening, which possible impact on the field, taking the Greek example, but also we can use the Greek example also for other member states, and all the discussion on who is missed in this dialogue, no? The presence of migrant and refugee and the whole the integration process. I propose to MEP Anne-Sophie Pelletier from France Insoumise to react to this first intervention, and in case I will be back to Bern later in the time of the debate. Sophie, are you there? Can you take the floor?
Ah, peut-être là, vous m'entendez mieux.
Tout à fait. On vous entend très bien.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me all right? All right. So thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I have to say that today's panelists are of a very high level, and it has been extremely interesting so far. The Asylum and Migration Pact is such that we have a Europe which is like a stronghold. It's not a Europe based on solidarity. Well, I would like to apologize because I am now currently reading the messages that came in the chat regarding this pact. And I do have some concerns. What can we do at the level of the European Parliament? We have these 5 days of identification, the procedural guarantees at borders. Well, I have the feeling that once again, it will really be not taken into account. I don't think that we can make a distinction between this pact and the return directives. You know that we are currently working on these directives. And even though we have a rapporteur from the Green, we clearly see that there are oppositions. With the right, the extreme right parties. It's all about control, returns, a high number of returns. So the situation is extremely worrying in the European Parliament. We even heard in the EP that they should all go to jail. So of course we are fighting against detention of adults, but all the more so of children. So this is a first, is a very nice fight, but it is so difficult. Then I also wanted to address another issue. I'm talking here under the supervision of control, but in this pact, I think that there will be bilateral agreements with countries. And this is also worrying. What about the role of the European Parliament? That will have nothing to say. What about the role of democracy? Because if we are talking about bilateral agreements, I do not quite see how we will be able to have a new vision. Well, you know, I'm just speaking here from the top of my head. So thank you very much, because so far these have been extremely interesting debates.
It was quite clear, actually. I think that you really point two of the main pillars of this pact. So the question of detention that would be increased, but also the question of return and all the readmission agreements at bilateral level, on which there is a need of accountability. I just mentioned the recent example of joint forces between Italy and France to support Tunisia to actually prevent all departure from the Tunisia border, mixing anti-terrorism and migration files. So very, very dangerous. So that is something that it's very important to follow. And I think that we have with us also Malin Bjork, also MEPs from the GUE. So Malin, you have been following this file on migration and asylum from so long time. So it will be a pleasure to listen to your comments on this last intervention, the previous one. Thank you, Malin.
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me? It's okay.
Well, yes, perfect.
I had to change my devices and everything. So I want to thank all the panelists, Milena, Helena, Inigo, David, Anila, in the two different panels, and you, of course, Sarah. And I think this for us in the left, in the European Parliament and at national levels, to hear from you on the ground and from civil society to hear your, you are the ones that see what is happening on the ground. You are the ones that can bear witness. You are the ones that actually put in place mechanisms of solidarity in practice and that can see what works and what doesn't work on the ground. So in order for us to do anything useful in spaces like the European Parliament, we have to be able to hear from you. We have to be able to hear from you firsthand. We have to be able to go and see with our own eyes what's happening. And I have been with Sarah and colleagues in Niger some time ago. We have been to Lesbos. We have been to Balkans with the Border Violence Network, to Bosnia and Croatia and even Slovenia to see the chain pushbacks. And that wouldn't have been possible to learn and to see what we did without your expertise and your eyes and hands on the ground. So I think this is something that I cannot be emphasized enough, how we, as in the end, as Anne-Sophie said, we are lawmakers, but in order to do that in any way, we have to be able to have that connection with you and your work out there. So this seminar, although it's via screens and with all these limitations, to have you be the ones that set the picture and us to respond, I think it's the good way to do things. And if I look just a little bit, I think it's so clear that we have on the one hand the practice and what's happening on the ground, and then we have the words and the papers of what it's supposed to be. And it's been said here by several of you. We have international law, we have EU law, we have monitoring mechanisms sometimes on paper. We have the law of the sea for rescue at sea. We have human rights law instruments, but in practice, we see exactly what you've been saying, the border brutality, the pushbacks, the lack of access to a fair asylum process. We see people dying at sea. So, and we see internment camps on the islands, and I'm very worried to hear that this is what is being contemplated also on the Canary Islands. So I must say that this gap has to be made. Maybe that's one of also our biggest tasks, is to make this gap visible. Because even when I hear now the Commission speaking about the new Migration Pact, I'm like, this is such a paper product. How have they visited the islands? Have they been to the Balkans? Have they seen what's happening there? Because that it's such a paper creation, and I don't see how they think that it can and will be able to deliver. So I think that I will come back to some of the Migration Pact elements. Then just to say a few words about Frontex also, and I thank you, Helena, for raising this. We have now seen the reports. Some of us have received your reports on the pushbacks, the illegalities, the involvement of Frontex before, but now it's out there. It's out there. It's been in the media, and there has to be some kind of follow-up. And we as MEPs have a very big ability because we have access to channels that others, that civil society and NGOs don't have. So we will have to follow that up. Frontex, we are creating a monster with no transparency, no possibility to intervene, far away from the national border management responsible agencies, and that can only evolve from terrible to worse to a catastrophic situation, I think. So I don't completely agree with you, Helena, that we have to not let go of this, because we as the left, we have been opponents to Frontex as this militarized border agency. But we have not to, we don't have to give up on that resistance. We have to increase it, we have to step it up, I think. And do please keep us informed about the developments also in the Canary Islands and how Frontex is going to move in there. And I was with some colleagues, as Costa said, in Lesbos, and we got to meet with, they flew in the responsible Frontex person for the Aegean Sea. And he said, when we confronted the NGO reports, which were very thorough about the pushbacks, he said they hadn't seen anything. They had all this fancy equipment. They have the boats, they have the personnel, they have 600 people there. They hadn't seen a thing. I mean, it's a joke, or it's a scandal, or it's both. And you know, we have to put them in front of their responsibility there, and we have to continue to attack Frontex on their breach of law. Then I just want to say a few words on the Migration Pact. We will be, I think it's difficult as MEPs, and you know, I'm happy to hear your input on that. It is, on the one hand, it's built on such foundations that I don't see how that can deliver anything that actually solves the situation we have put ourselves in with closed borders and brutality and closed Europe. But the law proposals are out there. The work of the European Parliament and of members of the European Parliament is to address those files. And we will need all your support in doing that. What it comes to the proposal of the pre-screening, the so-called solidarity mechanism. I think there is an obsession with returns, there is an obsession with militarized borders, and we have to be able to denounce this. And to actually, I think, this is my assessment as Swedish Left Party, that some of these, most of these proposals would be better if they didn't succeed, if they just got blocked somewhere. But in order to do that, we have to at least us, we have to work hard. You will be working on your side with practical solidarity and analysis of what is happening on the ground. So I just look forward to also to work together on these pieces of legislation, because you will be able to say, you know, what this will mean in reality and what it actually already means in reality. So, but we in the left, as Ann-Sofi was also saying, we are extremely committed to make sure and do everything we can to make sure that parts of this Migration Pact does not pass through the legislative process in this current form, because we think they are completely outrageous. I just want to say a small word on the file that I'm a rapporteur for the European Parliament, which is resettlement, the only legal and safe pathway as of now for refugees. We will be continuing that work, and I also thank those organizations and that work together with that, because as you know, some member states want to instrumentalize that instrument also in the externalization of borders process. But so far we are holding the ground, and we will continue to so. So once again, we are available and listening. So thank you very much for this seminar.
Thank you very much, Malin. First of all, because you underlined the key role of civil society organization and NGO to kind of watchdog, to monitoring what happened in the border in terms of human rights violation, and that it's very important. Secondly, because you cover the topic of accountability of Frontex agency, both in the Balkan routes, but also in the Canary Island. It's important to remind that Frontex started the ERA operation in Canary Island in 2006 and was present with their boats in front of inside Senegalese and Mauritanian water to prevent departure. That it's a clear violation of the Article 3 of the Human Rights Declaration that allow people to leave their country. So that was clear in 2006, and we are really to monitoring the evolution of this ERA operation now. So I propose to go back to another file of the pact, because it's not very much covered, and I think that it's very, very problematic. How solidarity is means in this pact, no? So there is solidarity for relocation. It's one option for member states, but also there is solidarity for return sponsorship. That it's quite crazy to think that solidarity is considered in terms of return policy. But also there is solidarity on support member states in their externalization policy. That is also problematic, which means that Hungary can support Italy to train the Libyan Coast Guard to process pushback. So, and then the last solidarity is to support reception. So there is a very, very strange concept of solidarity. I think that David was mentioning before the terms of solidarity. I don't know if we want just give us his analysis on this concept of solidarity. That is really the big file on the pact. And maybe later I will give the floor also to Milena to comment and to present their analysis on the pact mentioning before. And then we're looking also to other questions in the chat. So shortly, David, if you want to just comment a few words on the solidarity mechanism that is at least the heart of the pact.
Yes, Sarah, can I just say one word about detention beforehand, because I know that Sophia raised the question of detention and mentioned, Sophia, I should say, Europe Forteresse, and I just wanted to say that we have a real concern in relation to Article 4.1 of the proposed pre-screening regulation, because that says that during the screening process I described, the persons concerned shall not be authorized to enter the territory of a member state. So that cements in law this pre-entry new legal status, in fact, a legal limbo. And in essence, what that creates in effect is a universal deprivation of liberty. And of course, we say that that is contrary to the fundamental right to liberty contained in the EU Charter and every other international human rights instrument. The use of Article 4.1 by the member states, according to their national law, also creates a gap between national law, which will have a new detention basis, and EU law. Our understanding was that insofar as asylum is concerned, the question of detention is exclusively governed by EU law and is only permissible
sorry, David, you are in mute. So if you just, open your microphone. Yes, thanks.
I'm sorry, I seem to have gone to mute automatically. What I was saying there was that Article 4.1 opens the door to national laws on detention for persons seeking to access the EU asylum process. Until now, detention was governed exclusively by EU law, by the Reception Conditions Directive, Articles 8 to 11, and also by the Return Directive. But this creates a new opening for member states, some of which will use it systematically, that's the concern, to detain people almost universally at the border at this pre-entry phase, which is neither in the EU nor outside the EU. And that's something that we feel you should raise in particular. As regards the solidarity mechanism contained in the Asylum and Migration Regulation proposal, the replacement for the Dublin system in Articles 45, etc. You quite rightly say, Sarah, that there are options there for either assuming responsibility and distribution of asylum seekers on that basis, relocation, and then return sponsorship. And I suppose our particular worries are in relation to the question of return sponsorship, because what will happen if too many member states express the wish to contribute their solidarity, that's a euphemism, to contribute their solidarity by return sponsorships rather than by assuming responsibility for persons under the relocation mechanism. And then you have a nightmare scenario, because the relocation mechanism will be triggered for member states who agree to assist in returns but don't actually manage to execute the return. So in other words, if member state A says to member state B, we will assist with the return of a group of migrants to state C, but it cannot be done, or it cannot be done on time, then the persons concerned under the mechanisms as they're contained now will have to be relocated to member state A. And so how do vulnerable individuals have their rights protected in that context? If you have a lawyer in Lesbos and you're being told you are going to Budapest, Warsaw, or Stockholm, who does the lawyer discuss your case with in Warsaw, Budapest, or Stockholm? Which authorities do they deal with? And does it mean that local lawyers in the hotspots will be dealing with multiple authorities in multiple jurisdictions? That is, again, another area which is not simply, we say, clearly in breach of the right of effective access to asylum or the right of effective access to justice, but also cannot operate in practice and will not work.
Thank you very much, David. I'm absolutely agree with you. I will leave only a question in there. We have seen in 2016 that when relocation was mandatory, actually doesn't work. How can work now when there is other option in the table easily for country, for member states, because it will be easier to support kind of sponsorship return than to relocate someone. So I think that, as you mentioned, will not work. It's clearly there if you also look at the 2016 experience. So we have left 10 minutes. I propose to Milena to just present shortly the main point of their policy analysis on the pact, and just mention to you all that there are comments in the chat, so please have a look on what is saying by panelists. So please, Milena, if you want to introduce your analysis, it will be very useful as we are really deeply in discussion on the pact.
Thank you. So you will notice in the chat, and I can resend it again, we made a policy analysis that is actually built on the real life experiences of human rights defenders and people on the move. So we have tried to illustrate, based on the trends that we are seeing today, how the implementation of the pact might look in reality. And having in mind our expertise, we have focused on screening procedures, detention, safe country of origin concepts, and largely disputed age verification procedures, but also extension of time limits in crisis and appeal procedures that are lacking or are not clearly defined. To briefly touch upon the most important topics, arbitrary detention has for years now been a policy of individual member states such as Hungary, But with the new pact, we fear that it will rise to the EU level. And looking into the approach defined in the new pact, there are some extremely worrying similarities between the proposed screening centers and, for example, Hungarian transit zones, against which the European Court of Human Rights issued several interim measures, one on the account of starvation of people who were within the transit zone. And in addition, the Court of Justice of European Union ruled for the abolishment of transit zones, which we are now establishing probably under the new pact. By positioning detention as a part of the standard protocol of the asylum procedure, we fear the new pact both directly and indirectly legitimizes the overuse of detention. As part of pre-screening procedures, member states will be required to verify the ages of those lodging applications for protection, which is understandable. However, the inability of the new pact to address the highly fragmented age assessment policies, procedures, and practices in the member states again reveals a significant flaw in the new pact, or the draft of the new pact that we are seeing now. And apart from being deemed as unreliable by medical professionals, the methods of medical examination used during age assessments in some countries have often been found to be invasive or cause of mental or physical harm to young persons. And this is in direct violation of the Convention of the Rights of Child that the Union has ratified. But the main focus of our analysis and the case study that we have provided actually focuses on the so-called independent border monitoring mechanisms that are supposed to be in place in Croatia, which we used as a case example because in spite of the litany of inaction, misuse of funds, ongoing human rights abuses, and an ultimate failure to establish a truly independent monitoring mechanism, Commissioner Johansson continues to claim Croatian authorities have put such a mechanism in place with the Commission's support. So it seems that the new pact will task member states with establishing such mechanisms, giving little further elaboration on how they would be implemented, and it does not give much in a way of hope to human rights watchdogs across Europe's borders. I'm sorry, something is happening with my Zoom. So independent border monitoring mechanisms can supposedly be in place while at the same time pushbacks, collective expulsions, and the systematic lack of access to asylum procedures are ongoing. This is something that we are seeing in the field now. And we are worried by the way the EU funds are streamlined to selected NGOs, for example, through the Ministry of Interior in Croatian case, or other governmental bodies, which raises question concerning the independence of EU-funded monitoring mechanisms that are in place to look into the policies of member states or the ministries that are streamlining budget towards those who were supposed to be monitoring them. So what we need to conclude is a creation of truly independent border monitoring mechanisms that are led by national preventive mechanisms and independent NGOs, and preferably that would be funded directly by the Commission or through an independent agency. And this must include unannounced visits to border areas and police stations in the border areas, full access to data in border police stations, and must see enhanced cross-border collaboration and testimony collection from the affected population, as the ineffective mechanisms that are currently in place only take into account the cases of those who were able to remain in European territory and therefore were not necessarily victims of unlawful practices. And such a monitoring mechanism would benefit from an alarm system that could be triggered by potential asylum seekers in situations where their fundamental rights are being violated. Only by recentering their voices and realities of victims of European border regime can the EU hope to monitor it effectively and hopefully launch infringement procedures that would lead to tangible change. Thank you.
Thank you, Milena. For who is interested in analyzing the pact, my organization, Euromed Rights, published a deep analysis on the pact a few weeks ago, and we plan to publish a kind of simulation on will be the impact on the field in countries such as Italy if the pact will be approved, and we will surely publish the same day of off the discussion around the pact next November 30 in the GUE Council, so among the Minister of Interior of member states. So I will put, yes, so great, someone send a link to the report mentioned by Milena, and I will put the analysis by Romed Rights. I will just use the last 5 minutes to give the floor to Anila Noor to go back to 2 points of this pact that have been not so much mentioned, so the Dublin regulation and the resettlement. Please, Anila, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. So I just want to quickly reflect, because from last 1 year, we started in Brussels. We invited refugee and migrants to share their views on resettlement and Dublin. And what we hear is quite shocking, because if I take the example of Dublin, it's the basic philosophy or theme or policy, the image or the mind was to create more solidarity among states. But instead of creating a tool of solidarity, it is become like against something which it has been still using as against for the migrant or refugee who are coming in Italy and in Greece. So still there's a huge confusion and complexity involved in this method which is being used. And second, about resettlement, is like, if we compare the approach of resettlement has been used in Canada. So because from last 1 year, we are also involved in the ATCR, where they are presenting about the refugees resettlement as a good approach to bring refugee and migrant to the country of Canada. But in Europe, we hardly have any approach or talk about resettlement, any project, any proposal, and people are not using it as a good approach, because resettlement could be a good help to create more legal pathways. And we need to maybe to learn from our good countries who are really working on this kind of creating example, good practices. So we can learn from them. And I think Canada is one of the country who really taking migrants as a good their capital. So we can learn from that. And in the last, I just want to put recent few incident, unfortunate incident which happened, is creating again a high level of fear in terms of migrants in Europe, unfortunately. And Islamophobia is becoming like a tool against to migration. And this is our fear, being a representative of migrant and refugee. We are really feeling, instead of helping Europe, it can divide us. So we are here, we are trying to offer our help, our collaboration, and we invite all people who are here to work with us. And we really can create example of solidarity and mechanism and system where we can really create our own pact of migration and what kind of future we want for the inclusive and equal Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alina, to underline how solidarity is another thing totally different on how it's present in the pact, is solidarity among organizations with the refugee and migrant. The time is off, so thank you very much to all panelists for the very, very, very rich speech and analysis. Thank you very much to MEPs who intervene and to present their action related to the pact, but also related to the situation on the ground. Thank you very much to who organized and make possible this European Forum, among them Amandine and Panayoti and more others. And thank you very much to translators who make possible to have such rich exchange with speakers from different language. So thank you very much, and sorry, to be honest, if we sometimes go too fast, but yes, I think that the many comments are there, a lot of analysis. We have seen also mentioning in the chat, I also put our analysis, but also of course the Millennium Organization one, a lot to do. So it's important also to remind that now the discussion is open on the pact in the Council and in the Parliament. So it's time to be together and to really build a different alternative on the migration and asylum policy at EU level. It's very important now to react to this shaming proposal by the European Commission and to be able to do together, of course, among organizations, but also as reminded by Anila with migrant and refugee. So thank you very much and hope to see you soon for next step forward in our fight for migrant and refugee rights.
Thank you.
Bye.